Good to see you guys. Glad to be back here, get to worship with you guys and learn with you. Anybody like that new song Ben just introduced? That might have risen to my favorite song that we sing list pretty quickly. So thank you, Ben. That was great to get to lead us in that. We have quite a bit of ground to cover today, so I'm gonna jump in pretty quickly. So this week, as Brian already said, we're starting a new sermon series called In His Image. We're going to spend 6 weeks investigating God's design for men and for women. And so before we get into kind of the meat of today's sermon, I want to zoom out a little bit and share with you why we as pastors across the Resonate Network and why we as elders of our church here in Missoula decided that this topic was worth 6 weeks of our time. That's a pretty significant chunk of time to talk about one topic. So why did we decide this was worth doing? So I'm going to give kind of a lengthy introduction to this whole series, and then we'll get into the meat of this week's sermon. As we look out at the kind of the cultural landscape around us, it's pretty obvious that the most confused and convoluted topic in the world today is the meaning of manhood and womanhood, sex and gender. The most confused topic in our world today. Like if you jump on Facebook right now and try to make a new account, you have to scroll through 58 different genders that you could select as you create your profile. In just a few decades, the concept of gender identity went from a footnote in a medical manual to the most pervasive social contagion in the world. So let me give you a couple examples of what I'm talking about when I say that. The medical manual for the American Psychiatric Association is called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or the DSM. Okay, so I'm just going to say DSM. That's the manual for the American Psychiatric Association. Now, in 1994, the 4th edition of the DSM was published. Here it is right here. And here's what the DSM-4 said about gender identity disorder. It said, gender identity disorder is a persistent and strong cross-gender identification and a persistent unease with one's sex. Prevalence estimates range from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 100,000 for male to female, and 1 in 30,000 to 1 in 400,000 from female or for female to male. This was 1994. So just 30 years ago, gender identity disorder was a serious psychiatric condition affecting approximately 1 in every 100,000 people, somewhere right around there. So just for reference, the entire Missoula Valley has about 100,000 people in it. So that would be one person in the entire Missoula Valley that is affected by gender identity disorder. And remember, these aren't transgender people. That's not what's being talked about here. These are people who are feeling persistent discomfort with their sex. Okay, so keep that number in your head. 30 years ago, 1 in 100,000 approximately. In 2013, the DSM was updated to the 5th edition. So here's the cover of the 5th edition. And in the 5th edition, the term gender identity disorder was changed to gender dysphoria. You might be familiar with that language. And the reported prevalence jumped to 1 in 70. 1 in 70. So in just 20 years, 19 years between those two editions, the prevalence went from 1 in 100,000 to 1 in 70. That's a 4,300% increase in just 19 years. And that, keep in mind, 2013 was 10 years ago, 11 years ago at this point. I've spoken with public school teachers and public school nurses in Missoula that have told me it's close to 1 in 10 students in our public schools right now that identify as some sort of transgender or non-binary or gender non-conforming. NBC News recently reported that nearly 30% of Gen Z identify as LGBT. And a good portion of that 30% is about gender, not just sexuality. In all of human history, there has never been a shift in cultural opinion and in societal consequences this rapid or this significant. We've never seen something like this before. But it's not just the prevalence of gender identity issues that's concerning, it's the legal and the medical consequences that we're seeing play themselves out in the world. So, for instance, in September of 2023, California Senate passed a bill called AB 957. And here's what that bill said. You can go home and Google this. The bill says, existing law governs the determination of child custody and visitation in contested proceedings and requires the court, for purposes of deciding custody, to determine the best interest of the child based on certain factors, including, among other things, the health, safety, and welfare of the child. So that's the existing law. This bill would include a parent's affirmation of the child's gender identity or gender expression as part of the health, safety, and welfare of the child. And so, in other words, the courts in California can now take a child out of their parents' custody if the parents do not affirm the child's gender identity. 30 years ago, gender identity disorder was a clinical psychiatric condition. Today, you can have your children taken away from you if you don't affirm it and encourage it. Do you guys see how crazy that shift is in just 30 years? And not only can this confusion cause children to be taken from their parents, but it's also leading to the mutilation and castration of thousands of healthy children and young adults. Reuters reported in 2020 that in 2021, almost 18,000 children from 7 years old to 16 years old were prescribed puberty blockers, which do irreparable damage to the reproductive systems of children. U.S. News reported that between 2016 and 2019, over 48,000 people underwent some sort of gender-affirming surgery, like a double mastectomy, which is the removal of female breasts, or a phalloplasty, which is the destruction of a vagina and creation of a fake penis, or vaginoplasty, which is the destruction of a penis and creation of a fake vagina. This confusion around sex and gender has had catastrophic consequences for our society, particularly our young people and our children. Dr. Paul McHugh, who used to be a sex reassignment surgeon at Johns Hopkins Medical, recently wrote, "I have witnessed a great deal of damage from sex reassignment. The children, transformed from their male constitution into female roles, suffered prolonged distress and misery as they sensed their natural attitudes. We have wasted scientific and technical resources and damaged our professional credibility by collaborating with madness rather than trying to study, cure, and ultimately prevent it." That last sentence is really significant. By collaborating with madness rather than trying to study, cure, and ultimately prevent it. As we navigate this gender confusion in our world today, every single one of us is going to have to decide, are we going to do what feels loving by collaborating with madness, or are we going to do what is actually loving by telling the truth and helping people overcome this condition? The social, legal, medical, and theological implications of this confusion have tremendous consequences for the world around us. So with all of that in view, what are we to do as the church? What is our role in all this? How do we respond to this type of confusion? Well, there's a temptation for us to think the best way to show the unbelieving world that we love them and we care about them is to make sure that we never offend their sensibilities, that we never talk about things that they would disagree with. Like we can end up thinking we should preach on topics that everybody already agrees with, like the importance of loving your neighbors or the value of forgiveness or the evil of racism, but we should avoid controversial topics like abortion or gender confusion or hell. I've heard some version of that stance many, many times in these last few years. It's like we think that if we only talk about the things that don't offend anyone, the non-believers around us will see how winsome we are and they will gradually come into the church. So if that's your mindset coming into this sermon or this semester, I want to gently encourage you, the opposite is true. The exact opposite is true. Statistically, churches that refuse to talk about difficult subjects or that just simply adopt the culture's perspective on those topics show the least growth, the fewest conversions, and the smallest kingdom impact. But the churches that are growing and thriving and making a difference in the U.S. today are the churches that stand firm on the teachings of God, no matter how controversial they are. The great German reformer Martin Luther, he once wrote this convicting paragraph, convicting for preachers at least. He says, "If I profess with the loudest voice and the clearest exposition every portion of the truth of God, except precisely that little point which the world and the devil are at that moment attacking, I am not confessing Christ, however boldly I may be professing Christianity." He goes on to say, "Where the battle rages, there the loyalty of the soldier is proved. And to be steady on all the battlefields besides is merely flight and disgrace if he flinches at that point." So Luther is saying that the test of faithfulness for a church is not whether they stand firm on the issues that everybody already agrees with. The test of faithfulness is whether they stand firm on the issues that are under attack. If I stood up here week after week and only preached sermons that the whole world agreed with, even if they are true and biblical sermons, I would be a coward, unfit for the pastorate. Part of my job, and part of our elders' job, is to look at your lives and to look at the culture that you live in and see where the battle is raging. And then we need to bring truth into that battle. And so, as we see the way that our culture consistently attacks God's design for men and women, as we see the way that you are all smothered by this ungodly picture of sex and gender on our campus and on social media, we felt that it is high time to spend a full series laying out a biblical framework for manhood and womanhood. So that's why we're doing this series, to bring the light of truth into the darkness of confusion. And it's our prayer that in this series you will be equipped with the armor of God's truth that will make you impervious to the attacks of the enemy. That's our hope. That's what we've talked about and prayed about as elders and pastors. And so to start this series, to start today's content, we need to identify the philosophical foundation that is leading our culture in its current direction. So what is the lie that's underneath all of the confusion? What misunderstanding is fueling all of these different movements? That's a question that we need to ask ourselves. Well, to put it as simply as possible, the core problem is that we believe equality demands identicality. We believe equality demands identicality. So equality means equal worth, equal value, equal opportunities. Identicality means identical roles, identical responsibilities, identical designs, and identical outcomes. We all want equality. Everybody in this room wants equality. We want every person to have equal value and equal worth and equal opportunities. I don't think there's a single person in this room right now that legitimately thinks some people are more valuable than other people. That's a good thing. I'm thankful for that in this room today. But where it all goes wrong is when we think that equality demands identicality. When we think that the only way two things can be equal is if they are identical or interchangeable. And so our culture looks at men and women and says, if we want men and women to be equal, then we have to make them identical. We have to make them interchangeable. So that's why our culture wants men to be more feminine and women to be more masculine. That's why they want a man to be able to switch to a woman and a woman to be able to switch to a man. Because if men and women are fundamentally different than one another, they think that one must be more valuable than the other. If you believe this lie, that equality demands identicality, then your goal is going to be to make everyone completely androgynous. Completely androgynous. You don't want manly men. You don't want womanly women. You just want amorphous blobs of human. You just want humans. That's all that you can tolerate. If you believe that lie, that equality demands identicality, then you don't want sex and gender to be connected to each other. Right? You want gender to just be a personal identity that can change whenever you want it to. The feminist movement, the gender dysphoria epidemic, and the transgender movement are all the fruit of a rejection of God's design and an adoption of the lie that equality demands identicality. And so in this series, I fundamentally want to help us see that God's design shows us that equality does not demand identicality. Okay? God's design shows that equality does not demand identicality. Men and women can be equally valuable, equally glorious, equally necessary, while being fundamentally different and fundamentally unique. Our world does not need men to be more feminine. Our world doesn't need women to be more masculine. Our world doesn't need more boys who can shave. Our world doesn't need more girls who wear makeup. Our world needs husbands and fathers who act like men and not women. Our world needs wives and mothers who act like women and not like men. Our world needs men. Manly, masculine, godly, glorious men. And our world needs women. Womanly, feminine, godly, glorious women. And everywhere in the world that you find men and women acting like men and women, society flourishes. When men do what God has made them to do, and women do what God has made them to do, everything in a society flourishes. Families flourish, economies flourish, industries flourish, education systems flourish. But when you look at societies where men refuse to be men, and women refuse to be women, where fatherless homes are rampant, where fornication and abortion are the norm, where children are raised by their peers and by social media, those societies are in shambles. And so, as you can see, there's a lot at stake on the topic of manhood and womanhood. We need a crystal clear answer to the question, what makes a man a man? And what makes a woman a woman? Because being a man or a woman is more than just identifying as a man or a woman, right? There is a real and concrete reality underneath manhood and womanhood. But it's also, being a man or a woman is also more than just being male or female, right? Just because you are a male doesn't mean that you are a man. My 2-year-old daughter is biologically female. She's a long ways from being a woman, right? Just because you're a male doesn't make you a man. It's possible to be a 40-year-old male and still not be a man. It's possible to be a 40-year-old female and still not be a woman. Manhood and womanhood is deeper than identity, and it's deeper than biology. What makes a man and a woman a woman? Those are the questions that we hope to answer in this series. And so here's the outline for the next 6 weeks. I think this is in a little box on your handout. Today, we're talking about all the ways that men and women are the same. Our sameness, that's the topic this week. Although we are fundamentally different, men and women still have lots of similarities, and we're going to talk about those today. Next Sunday, we will start talking about man's purpose. Why did God create men? And then the week after, we'll talk about man's hurdles. Well, what are the common pitfalls that men succumb to? The week after that, we'll switch over to women, and we'll talk about women's purpose. Why did God create women? And week 5, we'll talk about women's hurdles. What are the common pitfalls that women fall into? And then week 6, we're going to close this series by seeing how the gospel of Jesus Christ cleanses us from our failures as men and women and empowers us to live into God's design as men and women. So that's our outline for the series. That all make sense? You guys clear on that? That's my introduction. Okay, that's everything I have for this series. Like Brian said, if you have questions, anything I just said or anything I'm going to say as we get into this particular sermon, please write it down, come to the Q&A. We'd love to talk to you and get face-to-face and get to interact with whatever you're thinking. So let's jump into today's content. Today, like I said, we're going to look at the ways that men and women are the same. The Bible has a lot to say about manhood and womanhood throughout, but the most important teaching on manhood and womanhood happens in the first 3 chapters of the Bible. Genesis 1 through 3, and those are the chapters that we're going to be in for almost all of this series for the next 6 weeks. So turn with me in your Bible to Genesis chapter 1, and we're going to read the story of God's creation of man and of woman. From that story, our goal will be to see the similarities between men and women. Okay, so we're going to read verse 1 and then 24 through 28. You can read with me, it'll be on the screen behind me. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things and beasts of the earth according to their kinds." And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful, and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." So from this text, I want to answer 3 questions that will help us see the ways that God has made men and women the same. 3 questions we're going to answer today. Number 1, how are men and women different from God? Number 2, how are men and women different from animals? And number 3, how are men and women different from children? Those are our 3 questions. And here's a diagram that we're going to use for the next few weeks to kind of help keep us on track of the answers to these questions and future questions. You have this diagram at the bottom of your note sheet, and you can fill out some of these blanks as we go along. If we can answer these 3 questions, how are men and women not God, not animals, not children, we're going to have a pretty good understanding of how men and women are similar. So let's jump into these questions. Number 1, how are men and women different from God? Different from God. Well, 2 observations from Genesis 1. Number 1, we are creatures. We are creatures. Look at verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. God created everything. That means that before there was creation, before there was time, before there was matter or history, there was God. Every single thing that exists, including men and women, are derived from God. God is the source of all of it. And that is not true of God. Okay? God was not created. God did not have a beginning. God is not derived from anything. He is self-existent. This means that God has infinite power and infinite authority. And we as men and women do not. We are finite, we are limited, we are under God's authority. We are creatures. Number 2, we have a design. We have a design. Because God was not created, God wasn't designed by another. But we were created, which means we were designed by another. In other words, we're not floating aimlessly through existence. Like, we have a purpose, we have a design because we have a creator. Since God is the engineer that has created us as humans, God is the one that gets to make the rules about how we operate. In Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis writes, "In reality, moral rules are directions for running the human machine. Every moral rule is there to prevent a breakdown or a strain or a friction in the running of that machine. That is why these rules at first seem to be constantly interfering with our natural inclinations. When you're being taught how to use any machine, the instructor keeps on saying, 'No, don't do it like that.' Because, of course, there are all sorts of things that look all right and seem to you the natural way of treating the machine, but they do not really work." So C.S. Lewis is saying that since we have a design, there is a set of rules that we are to follow if we want our lives to work out. Just like there's a set of rules you follow if you want a machine to work. It's important to note that C.S. Lewis says that God's design for us as men and women will often frustrate us. Like some things that we're going to talk about in the next 5 weeks will be frustrating to us because that design is at war with how we want it to work. That's why Proverbs 14:12 says, "There is a way that seems right to man, but its end is the way to death." So there's a way that seems right to us in our natural state, and if you follow that way, it will lead you to death. Because God is the creator and we are creatures, God has the right to tell us how to live. And he has the right to tell us how to live as men and as women. The difference between God and humans is that we are creatures and he is the creator. And that means that the fundamental distinction of character between God and man is humility. That's the fundamental distinction. John Piper defines humility this way. He says, "Humility for us at its heart is to feel and think and say and act in a way that shows I am not God. I am not God." That is fundamentally what humility is. And using that definition, hopefully we all see that it's crucial that we are humble and God is not humble. If God were humble, the entire universe would come apart. God cannot say, "I am not God," just like we cannot say, "I am God." This is the fundamental distinction between us. We are to be humble, and God is not, because he is God. So let me summarize the answer to our first question. Question 1, how are men and women different from God? The answer is we are creatures. God is the creator. We are creatures. God is the creator. And the fundamental distinction between man and woman and God is our humility. We are to have humility. Number 2. Our second question, how are men and women different from animals? Again, 2 observations. Number 1, we are made in God's image. We are made in God's image. Look at verses 26 and 27. It says, "Then God said, 'Let us make man in our image, after our likeness.' So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female, he created them." Out of all of creation, nothing else is made in God's image. The image of God has been bestowed on man and woman and nothing else. Humans have been created distinctly and above the rest of the created order. We are the pinnacle of the created order. So here's an illustration. I have a black lab named Hildy. Now, Hildy is the best dog in the world. This is Hildy and Piper in our back behind our house recently. Hildy and I have a lot of similarities. We are similar in a lot of different ways. We both love to run. We love to hike. We love to play. We love to swim. We're both happy to see each other when we get home. We both love food. There's a lot of similarities between Hildy and I, but there's also some really big differences between me and Hildy. I have a spiritual component to my being, and Hildy does not. I have a soul. That means that I have the ability to seek God and understand Him. Hildy does not. I have creative ability. Hildy does not. I can dream, I can imagine, I can conceptualize things that are not in front of me. I can think about the future. Hildy can only think about what she has seen or experienced. Third, I feel shame when I do something wrong. Hildy does not. There are days, now for sure, there are days when I come home and Hildy's slinking in a corner somewhere because she did something she wasn't supposed to. She knows she's going to get in trouble. But that's not because she's ashamed. It's because she knows punishment is coming. It's not shame. As soon as the punishment's over, everything is back to normal. Like Hildy's not laying awake at night thinking, I can't believe I did that. That was so... She's not ashamed of herself. She's just afraid of punishment when she does something wrong. Fourth, I am governed by a moral code. Hildy is not. I am bound by a moral code that Hildy is not bound to. Now, there are things that she might do that I could punish her for because I don't like them. Like if I got home and she chewed up the couch, I would not be happy about that. But it's not a sin for her to chew up the couch. It's not sin. When a lion chases down a baby antelope to eat it, many people might say that is sad, but no one says that is sinful for the lion to do that. Animals are governed by animal desires and animal instincts. I am governed by a moral code. You are governed by a moral code. So I know some of you animal lovers, you're mad at me because I said your cat doesn't have a soul and you're going to try to convince me later. You're totally welcome to come to the Q&A and try to convince me that your cat has a soul, but at some level, we all recognize this distinction. Like we're all aware of it if you really kind of dig down a little bit. So for example, let's say my family, the Rhodes family, we run into a hard time financially. We can't feed all the mouths in our family anymore. We got to get rid of some mouths to feed. Who do we get rid of? Who goes? I can tell you one thing. It's not Tracy. Right? Tracy costs 10 times more than any of the dogs. Guaranteed, she costs way more. So if the calculation is just based on math, then Tracy's out the door. Easy answer. But we all know that's not the metric, right? It's also not Piper. Hildy is more obedient than Piper is, almost all of the time. So if obedience is the metric, then Piper is out the door. But we all know that that's not the metric. If the Rhodes family runs into hard times and somebody has to go, it's the dog. The dog goes. There's not even a second guess about it, and you all know it. Everyone knows that the metric is not cost. The metric is not obedience. The metric is value. And humans are infinitely more valuable than animals. The most highly disabled person you have ever met is infinitely more valuable than Secretariat, the champion racehorse who's made millions of dollars off of racing and stud fees. When your dog, here's another illustration, when your dog gets old and its health starts to fail, what do? You take it to the vet and have it put down. When your mother gets old and her health starts to fail, what do? You invite her to live in your house and you take care of her. We all know this instinctually. It's because humans are infinitely more valuable than animals. We all know this to be true, whether we like to admit it or not. Now, I want to be really clear just for a second so that nobody accuses me of this. God has given us as humans the role of ruling and subduing and stewarding all of creation, which includes animals. And so God commands us to respect and to care for and to value animals as part of creation. So just because animals are not made in the image of God doesn't mean that we have permission to abuse them or neglect them or anything like that. All of that is sinful and wicked. So we are different from animals in that we are made in the image of God. Our second observation, so first one, we're made in the image of God, animals are not. Second, men and women, as image bearers, have equal value. So men and women, both a man and a woman, both bear the image of God, therefore we have equal value. Some people would argue that because Adam was created first, and because man is given headship in the home and the church and the culture, and because God revealed himself in masculine language, right? He uses masculine pronouns. Jesus came to earth as a man. Therefore, men are more valuable than women. People have argued that in the past. But I hope you can track with me here. Those people are making the same mistake that our culture is making by believing that equality demands identicality. right? They're saying that since women are not identical to men, they therefore cannot be equal to men. It's the same false logic. They're just falling off on the other side of the road. The fact that men and women are made in the image of God means that both men and women have equal value and equal worth. The fundamental difference between humans and animals is the image of God. And that means that the fundamental distinction of character between man and woman and animals is that we have discipline. Okay? Discipline is the word that we're going to be using. Now, when I say discipline, I don't just mean the ability to do what you're commanded or not do something that you want to do, right? A well-trained dog can do that. When I say discipline, I mean access to a higher form of being. I mean that there is something in you that is not just instincts and animal drives and feelings and reactions. We have souls. We are creative. We have a moral code. All of those things imply a level of discipline that is distinct from animals. So the fundamental distinction between humans and animals is discipline caused by the image of God. So let's summarize this second question. How are men and women different from animals? The answer is we are created in the image of God, and animals are not. Animals are not. And the distinction of character is discipline. Discipline is what makes us different. Number 3, we're almost done here. Number 3, how are men and women different from children? How is a man and a woman different from children? Now, although children are not mentioned in Genesis 1, because Adam and Eve were created as adults, the Bible is full of teaching on children and teaching for children. In 1 Corinthians 13, the Apostle Paul says, "When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways." So Paul here is implying that there is some difference between the way a child thinks and acts and the way a grown-up thinks and acts, right? In 1 Peter 5, Peter tells the young people to obey their elders and to be humble, which signifies that children do not yet know how to live, and so they need to obey people who are older than them. He goes on to tell the young people to cast their anxieties on God, which signifies that they need to learn emotional regulation. He tells them to be sober-minded, which signifies that they need to learn self-control and decision-making. There are tons of these examples in the Bible. The Bible makes a clear distinction between adults, who are assumed to be mature, and children, who are assumed to be immature. To be an adult means that you are mature, physically, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, and children are immature in those things. What makes a child is its inability to take care of itself and take care of those around it. Children must be fed, they must be taught, they must be nurtured. They can't do that for themselves, and they certainly can't do it for others. But adults are capable of self-leadership. Adults are capable of other leadership, right? Others' leadership. Children are not capable of that stuff. That's why defining adulthood by a number, like 18 in U.S. law or 13 in Jewish cultures or 15 in Hispanic cultures, it's a little bit silly because every child comes into adulthood at a different time when they develop their ability to lead themselves and lead others. There are a lot of 25-year-olds in the world today that are not yet adults, that have not developed that ability. Like they have beards and they can drive cars and they can buy beer at the gas station, but they have no ability to lead themselves and are still children at heart. The fundamental distinction between men and women on one hand and children on the other is responsibility. Adults take responsibility for themselves and for others. Children do not. So let's summarize our last question. How are men and women different from children? The answer is we are mature. Adults are mature and children are not. And the distinction of character is responsibility. We take responsibility where children do not. Both men and women equally take responsibility where children do not. And so this week we've talked about the ways that men and women are the same. Let me run through it really quick again. First, we're the same in that we are not God. We are creatures. He is the creator, and that means that we must walk in humility. Second, we're the same in that we are not animals. We are made in the image of God, and that means that we must walk in discipline. And number 3, we are the same in that we are not children. We are mature, and that means that we must walk in responsibility. Now, in the next 4 weeks, we're going to talk about the tips of the pyramid, which is where all of the confusion lies in our society, our culture today. What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean for a man to be a man and not a woman? What does it mean for a woman to be a woman and not a man? That's what we're going to talk about in these next few weeks. So I hope that you will join us in those weeks. I'm going to work hard to be as specific and practical as I can, and I'm praying, really am praying that God would bring truth and light and clarity, the kind of truth and light and clarity that you need as you walk in His design. So that's what we have today. Before we go, and as we prepare for the rest of this series for the next 4 weeks, I have a couple applications for us. I want you to spend this week making sure that your mental categories are in order, or at least thinking through some of these mental categories. Here's what I mean. 3 applications today. These are pretty broad. Number 1, men, learn to think biblically about women. Start thinking biblically about women. Reject the stereotype that women are lesser or inferior or unequal. Reject the lie that women are sexual objects or servants that exist for our pleasure or our comfort. That's the lie that so much of TV and movies and music and social media and especially pornography tells us, that women exist for our comfort and our pleasure, and you must reject it. Don't dismiss them intellectually. Don't deny them opportunities to exercise their gifts. Don't demean and denigrate women with crude joking. Don't use their affection or their bodies as a tool for your comfort and your pleasure. And don't treat them like your therapist. Don't build emotional intimacy that you're not matching with commitment and clarity. Instead, learn to treasure and respect women as your sisters, as daughters of your Father in heaven, and as equals to you in value and in worth. And to you guys, I'm going to say this to the girls as well, believe that whether you are single or married, God made you how you are for a purpose, and He wants to use you in His kingdom. Number 2, for the women, learn to think biblically about men. Same application. Think biblically about men. Reject the lie that men are animals or abusers or power hungry. Reject the stereotype that men are idiot Neanderthals or one-dimensional simpletons. Right? If you think about pretty much every TV sitcom that's been popular in the last 20 years, the common factor is that the dad is a bumbling idiot. In all of them. Think through all of them. Modern Family, The King of Queens, Full House, Family Guy, The Simpsons, The Office. That's not really a family, but Michael's the father figure, right? This is just the message being taught to you in our culture. So don't assume the worst of men. Don't think that every chivalrous act is an insult to your intelligence. Don't gossip and slander the men around you. Don't let them play emotional or physical games with you. Instead, learn to treasure and respect men as your brothers, as sons of your Father in heaven, and as equals to you in worth and in value. And to you ladies, learn to have high expectations for the way that men approach you and honor you as sisters. Develop high expectations. I'm going to talk about this more in the coming weeks, but the single most powerful force that can transform the culture of our young men is if young women stop putting up with their immature nonsense. Like, that's what's going to change the dudes in our culture. So, ladies, understand your value and develop some emotional security so that when little boys who can shave come to you and want to use you or play games with you, you can laugh in their face like they deserve. That's what we need. And just like I said to the guys, ladies, believe that whether you are single or married, God made you how you are for a purpose, and He wants to use you in His kingdom. And then number 3, to all of us, everyone, understand that equality does not demand identicality. Start to figure that out in your head. Equality does not demand identicality. Differences in function and design and roles and biology do not equal differences in value. Men and women are equal in value, yet vastly different from one another, and that's a good thing. The illustration that I use all the time, imagine if you go to the store and you buy a $100 wine glass and a $100 thermos. Which one's more valuable? Neither, right? You just paid $100 for both of them. They are equal in value, yet they are different in looks, in design, and in purpose. They are totally different, yet equally valuable. Don't buy the lie that equality demands identicality. The great writer G.K. Chesterton, he wrote a little satirical poem that I think is relevant here, and I love it. So we'll read it real quick. G.K. Chesterton said, "If I set the sun beside the moon, and if I set the land beside the sea, and if I set the town beside the country, and if I set the man beside the woman, I suppose some fool would talk about one being better." This is exactly the lie that Chesterton is addressing. May we not be those fools that think that just because two things are different means that one must be better than the other. So this week, spend some time building those mental categories, and next week we're going to look at the tip of the masculinity pyramid. What does it mean to be a man? So I hope to see you guys there. I'm going to pray for us, and I want to invite the band to come up here and worship with us. So would you guys pray with me? Well, God, we're thankful for this evening, for the chance to worship you, for the chance to learn about you and your design for us. God, more than anything, we are thankful for, just like the song said that we sang earlier today, that you have given your Son as an all-sufficient merit, that he's earned everything that you required of us. And so now we're not underneath the law, we're not saved by the law, but God, we are saved by grace. We're saved by the grace of your Son, that his righteousness can be attributed to us if we have faith in him. And God, when we come to faith in him, we thank you that you didn't just leave us in an aimless, purposeless, designless universe, but you actually gave us rules to follow. You showed us how to run the human machine in your word. So God, in these next few weeks, would you help us trust your word? When we read it, would we believe what you're saying and believe that you are the engineer so you know what is best, even if it bucks against what we think might be right? God, would you give us the humility to submit to you and to submit to your teaching and what it means for us to be men and women. Lord, we love you. We thank you. We thank you for all this. More than anything, we thank you for Jesus. It's in his name we pray. Amen.